It's been a very long time since I was actually asked to do a book review or even thought about doing one. And recently, I'm not exactly sure why I was asked to review this, but this book, The Meaning of Belief, Religion from an Atheist Point of View by Tim Crane, came my way for review. And I thought, what's the point in just writing a textual review that not that many people are going to see? Let's record a video, do that review for you. Needless to say, popular books in this sort of atheism versus religion debate are a bit like buses. You can lull yourself into thinking that no more are coming, and then suddenly lots come on at once. And we've had John Gray's 7 Types of Atheists, for example, in recent months. But entering the debate, then we have this book by Tim Crane, who is a philosopher at the Central European University, a professor of philosophy at the Central European University in Budapest. And it's much more kind-spirited and engagingly written than a lot of these texts in this so-called debate. As Crane notes, the arguments put forward by the new atheists, so that's Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, and Dennett to some extent, don't touch the vast majority of what he calls believers, and they are dismissed by scholars of religion as missing the point. Yes, indeed, I would see these books as part of the discourse that we are supposed to be studying within the critical study of religion. So Crane sees his book as a much more nuanced, constructive approach than these sort of new atheist tomes, offering a philosophical picture of religion as he sees it, as well as what he says, some practical advice to atheists. And he attempts this through 5 engaging chapters in which he first of all sketches a picture of religion as he sees it, in terms of the combination of 2 ideas. These are what he calls the religious impulse and identification, and the link between them provided by the idea of the sacred. So, there's initially something potentially interesting, critically, going on there. He then works with this model through a discussion of the supposed link between religion and violence, and an argument for tolerance between atheists and the religious. And a major strength of this book is its generous and ironic tone. I've written previously criticizing the new atheists for their propensity to ignore or dismiss counter-evidence, to fall foul of what Amarnath Amarasingam argues in a 2010 article, fall foul of the ultimate attribution error, and also to act as propagandists for a sort of narrow-minded scientism. So Crane engages head-on with many of the new atheists' arguments and does an excellent job of demonstrating that whatever religion is, it's much more than a combination of cosmology and morality. And he rightly chastises Dawkins and his ilk for their undue focus upon supernatural agency to the detriment of other potential aspects such as practice or community. And going further, he also critiques the cognitive science of religion for its propensity to focus upon counterintuitive beliefs, arguing that judgments about whether beliefs are intuitive or not requires that we immerse ourselves in their world and see what is central to their worldview and what is peripheral. He also provides a nuanced discussion of, aspects such as the conflict between Sunni and Shia. He demonstrates that factual or existence claims are not the same as scientific claims. This whole notion that, creationism is in some way scientific, it's not. And argues convincingly that bringing up children in a certain religion is not some peculiar perversity of religious indoctrination, but is part of what human beings do all the time. It's a big critique that the new atheists throw at religion, is that, bringing up children is akin to child abuse even. Crane shows that this is, parents bring up children with all sorts of things. Why would we single this one aspect out as being inherently problematic or difficult? So in short, on the good points, in an open-minded and non-patronizing manner, Crane shows time and again that scientific and philosophical arguments are unlikely to be generally effective in eliminating religious belief. That was a quote. And also that in much of what passes for debate in this whole atheism versus theism, science versus religion sphere, it's mostly just people talking past each other or shouting at each other. So far, so good. So far, not much new, but great, a nice, generous tone, what one doesn't normally get in these things. However, of course, I've got some criticisms. I've got 5 interrelated criticisms to make from the perspective of critical religious studies. First of all is that Crane consistently reifies religion as a substantive phenomenon, and with a clear definition throughout his book. He refers to, for example, what religion means, to seeking an understanding of religions by following the way they developed historically, to the phenomenon itself, and to genuinely religious practice. And this reification is highly problematic because it naturalizes this contested category that's implicated in a particular history and constructed along the lines of Protestant Christianity, de-emphasizing difference, bound up in power dynamics, theologies of evolutionism, colonialism, modernity. Essentially, Crane would do well here to read Talal Asad, Timothy Fitzgerald, Russell McCutcheon, Tomoko Masuzawa, and others, including myself and David Robertson, who historicize and deconstruct this sui generis model. Secondly, through this act of reification, Crane consistently divides the world's population into those who are religious and those who are not, and positions himself within this latter group. So religion apparently for him cannot refer to any belief system at all. Humanism is apparently not a religion. Religion somehow differentiated by its propensity, quote, to make sense of the world by seeing a kind of meaning or significance in things. It dominates all aspects of believers' lives. And each of these assertions, and many like them, is highly contestable. And my interest is not in whether, for example, humanism is a religion, but in what it means to make such a claim. And many of Crane's points do not require the word religion at all. Human beings participate in rituals, have normative commitments, identify with groups, find significance in things, and so on. So for Crane, as open-minded as he is, religion seems to be a dirty word. It to quote him again, commands and absorbs the passions and intellects of billions of people, many more than have any interest in science. And he argues again, many educated people generally accept the modern scientific worldview without being interested in the details or immersed in scientific thinking. And then he contrasts this apparent lack of interest in science with the worldwide interest in or commitment to religion. So this false dichotomy speaks volumes. The basis of his assumption that a generalized interest in religion among the population is analogous to interest in the details of scientific research seems to be nothing more than boundary maintenance, othering, and identity politics through and through. My third point, the form of tolerance that he extols throughout this book, whilst admirable in part, like who doesn't want to extol tolerance? Tolerance is a good thing. It uncritically supports a model of religion that demonizes militancy or extremism and naturalizes what Tim Fitzgerald would call liberal secular principles, such as, to quote Fitzgerald, the progress of nations, self-regulating markets, the natural right to the unlimited accumulation of private property. And this model, presumably rational secularists like Crane, we can safely tolerate good religion or proper religion. To go back to Fitzgerald's summary, he says, good religion is what conforms to and does not challenge liberal secular principles. Good religion stays out of politics, but bad religion takes a critical stand against liberal categories and is therefore fanatical. Perhaps this isn't a problem for Crane, but I would say that others would do well to note the ideological assumptions encoded in his model. Fourth, for all of Crane's attempts to move beyond a focus on belief through emphasizing the role of identification and practice, belief is still front and center, right? Within religious studies, scholars have long argued that belief appears universal because of the universalist claims of the tradition with which it's most associated, which is Christianity, or Protestant Christianity to be exact. And thus we return to my first critique, right? But furthermore, Crane's focus seems to remain squarely throughout the book upon the propositional belief of individuals. There's nothing on the implicit, the banal, the situational, or the unchallenged. And despite the veracity of his argument that scientific arguments aren't likely to be effective at eliminating religious belief, by focusing upon belief as the sine qua non of religion, he's perpetuating the very problem that he apparently seeks to address. My final criticism then concerns something that's quite dear to my heart. It concerns the absence of religious studies scholarship in the book. Just like Daniel Dennett before him, he seems to assume that by reading William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience and Emil Durkheim, that's effectively all one needs, or Durkheim's Elementary Forms, that by reading these two, that's all that you need when approaching religion. I mean, and also it's quite difficult to tell how much he's actually read of them. Yes, he cites a bit of Max Weber. Yes, he relies heavily upon popular religionist Karen Armstrong as well. But quite simply, reading these very, very early 20th century, late 19th century works is not enough to pontificate about religion, no matter what open-minded perspective you're coming from. If you'd engaged with some of the scholars that I've already mentioned, you might have realized that statements like the following don't make sense. They're not enough. The origin of the concept of the religious is a matter of controversy and still somewhat obscure. He makes that comment on page 5, then just moves on. This is so important. It's not vague or incorrect or superficial to problematize religion with movements such as Nazism, Stalinism, or Maoism, right? He points to those and says that it's incorrect to do that it's superficial. Commitments to the sacred are not inherently bound up with notions of the supernatural or the transcendent. They're not solely the preserve of the religious, but by taking these points seriously, this wouldn't allow him to carry out the othering that I mentioned in my second point. For instance, in chapters 2 and 3, Crane attempts what I could never hope or indeed want to achieve in what could be a 40-year career in the social science of religion. He attempts an accurate account of the phenomenon itself, right? But, hey, perhaps that's my failing, not his. So to conclude, basically, it's worth reflecting on how he characterizes the work himself. He says, quote, "It's not supposed to be an academic work. I offer no new theories or empirical discoveries. What I do offer is a philosophical picture plus some practical advice for atheists." From a critical RS perspective, I stand by all my critique. I find it much more interesting as empirical data, as a cultural product contributing to the discourse on religion in a particular socio-historical context. As a contribution to the atheism versus theism debate, sure, it's much more generous in spirit than many others and might provide a constructive entry point for some of those who are tired of the shouting match, right? This book will probably help those who are invested in the debate to understand some of the views of the other, but it is somewhat anachronistic to reduce the other to just views. And a final plug here, I would suggest that if anyone is looking for a critical approach to religion and to atheism, to understand what religious studies does, and to basically, I would say, do what Crane is trying to do, whilst also engaging with worked examples, proper philosophical critical thought, and decent, up-to-date social scientific work in the study of religion, should look no further than this book by Craig Martin. Thanks very much.